So my ex-girlfriend tried to scam me out of 2,000 euros for some fake spiritual retreat, and I only found out because I'm naturally suspicious of anything that costs more than my monthly rent. She showed me this glossy brochure about soul cleansing and energy alignment, talking about how this retreat would transform our relationship. The whole thing sounded like complete bullshit to me, but she was so convinced it was real. I decided to do some digging online and found dozens of reviews calling it a straight-up scam. The worst part was when I found an email confirmation for the retreat booking, made under my name, with my credit card details that she somehow got hold of. When I confronted her at dinner with friends, she completely lost it and tried to claim my money was basically hers anyway since we were together. That's when I realized I was dating someone who saw me as a walking ATM. So I'm Ryan, 28M, IT technician. I work for a mid-sized company doing network maintenance and helping people who somehow manage to break their computers in ways that shouldn't be physically possible. It's decent work, pays the bills, and I get to solve problems all day, which I actually enjoy. I'd been dating Emma for about 8 months at this point. We met through mutual friends, and things seemed pretty normal at first. She worked part-time at some wellness center doing reception work, always talking about crystals and meditation and that sort of thing. I'm not really into that stuff, but I figured everyone has their hobbies, right? The thing about Emma was that she was always kind of vague about money. She'd suggest expensive restaurants, then somehow forget her wallet, or talk about wanting to go on trips, but never seemed to have any savings. I started noticing I was paying for basically everything, but she was good at making it seem natural somehow. She lived in this tiny studio apartment that was pretty much just a bed and a kitchenette, while I had a decent one-bedroom place that I'd worked hard to afford. She started spending more and more time at my place, which was fine initially, but then she began acting like she lived there. She'd rearrange my furniture and leave her stuff everywhere. Looking back, there were red flags I should have noticed earlier. But when you're in the middle of it, you make excuses and tell yourself things will get better. I thought maybe she was just going through a rough patch financially and things would balance out eventually. It was a Thursday evening and I'd just gotten home from work, looking forward to ordering some takeout and watching Netflix. Emma was already at my apartment when I walked in, which wasn't unusual since I'd given her a spare key a few weeks earlier. She was sitting on my couch with this huge smile on her face, like she'd just won the lottery or something. She told me she had amazing news and that she'd found something that would completely change our lives. I was immediately suspicious because in my experience, anything that promises to change your life usually wants to empty your wallet first. But I sat down and asked her what she was talking about. That's when she pulled out this glossy brochure from her bag. It was professionally printed on expensive paper with all these photos of people meditating on beaches and in forests. The title said something like I flipped through it while she explained how this retreat would help us connect on a deeper spiritual level and remove all the negative energy that was supposedly blocking our relationship. The whole thing looked like something you'd find in the back of a magazine next to ads for miracle weight loss pills. There were testimonials from people with names like and talking about how the retreat had saved their marriages and opened their chakras. I tried not to roll my eyes while Emma went on about energy alignment and spiritual awakening. Then she got to the part about the cost. 2,000 euros each. She said it like it was totally reasonable, like we were talking about buying groceries or something. I nearly choked on the water I was drinking. For 1,000 euros total for what looked like a weekend of sitting in circles talking about our feelings. I told her there was no way I could afford something like that, and besides, the whole thing looked sketchy as hell. That's when her expression changed completely. She got this hurt look and started talking about how I didn't support her spiritual growth and how I was always negative about things that were important to her. She explained that she'd already spoken to the retreat organizers and they were willing to give us a discount if we booked together. Only 2,000 euro total instead of 4,000 euros. What a bargain, right? She made it sound like we'd be crazy not to take advantage of such an amazing deal. I asked her how she expected us to pay for it, and she got this weird look on her face. She said she'd been thinking about it, and since I made more money than her, it would make sense for me to cover the cost. She promised she'd pay me back eventually, but she was vague about when that might happen. The whole conversation felt wrong somehow. She wasn't asking me to go with her on this retreat. She was telling me we were going, and that I was paying for it. When I tried to object, she started getting emotional, saying I didn't care about our relationship and that I was holding us back from reaching our full potential together. The next day at work, I couldn't stop thinking about that brochure and Emma's whole sales pitch. Something about the way she'd presented everything felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced what she was going to say. During my lunch break, I decided to do some research. I pulled up the retreat's website on my computer. It looked professional enough at first glance, with lots of stock photos of people looking peaceful and enlightened. But when I started digging deeper, things got weird fast. The section was full of vague language about ancient wisdom and modern healing techniques, but didn't actually say what they did or who ran the place. I tried to find information about the retreat leaders, but their bios were just as vague. One guy claimed to be but didn't mention where he got certified or by whom. Another woman said she'd studied with, but didn't specify where or when. The whole thing felt like they'd just made up impressive-sounding credentials. Then I started looking for reviews. That's when things got really interesting. The first few Google results were glowing testimonials that looked suspiciously similar to the ones in the brochure. But when I dug deeper and checked sites like TripAdvisor and Reddit, I found a completely different story. There were dozens of posts from people warning others to stay away from this retreat. One person described how they'd paid the full amount up front and then been told the retreat was canceled due to when they asked for a refund, they were told it wasn't possible because the money had already been spent on. Another review detailed how the retreat was basically just a weekend of sitting in a circle talking about feelings, with no actual spiritual guidance or professional counseling. The food was apparently terrible, the accommodations were sketchy, and the whole thing felt like a poorly organized camping trip that cost thousands of euros. The more I read, the clearer it became that this was a straight-up scam. These people were targeting couples and individuals who were going through relationship problems or personal crises, promising them transformation and healing, then taking their money and delivering nothing of value. I found one particularly detailed post from someone who'd gone through the exact same thing with their partner. The scammers had approached them through wellness centers and spiritual shops, targeting people who seemed vulnerable or desperate for change. They'd use high-pressure sales tactics and emotional manipulation to get people to commit to paying large amounts up front. By the time I finished reading all the reviews and complaints, I was pretty sure Emma had been targeted by these scammers. But what I couldn't figure out was whether she was an innocent victim who'd been fooled, or if she was somehow in on it. The way she presented everything to me felt too polished, too prepared. I spent the rest of my workday thinking about how to handle this situation. I could just show Emma the reviews and hope she'd see reason. But something told me it wouldn't be that simple. When I got home that evening, Emma wasn't there, which gave me a chance to think about how I wanted to approach this whole situation. I'd printed out some of the worst reviews I'd found online and was planning to show them to her when she got back. But first, I wanted to check something that had been bothering me all day. Emma had left her laptop open on my kitchen table, which wasn't unusual since she'd been spending so much time at my place. I know it was probably wrong to look, but something about this whole retreat thing was making me paranoid. I opened her email to see if she'd been in contact with these retreat people. What I found made my stomach drop. There were dozens of emails between Emma and someone calling themselves, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was finding a booking confirmation email that had been forwarded to Emma's account. The confirmation was for 2 spots at the retreat, and it was made under my name. My full name, my address, and what looked like my credit card information. The booking had been made 3 days ago, the day before Emma had even mentioned the retreat to me. According to the email, a deposit of 500 euros had already been charged to my card. I immediately checked my online banking, and sure enough, there was a charge for 500 euros to something called I'd been so busy at work that I hadn't noticed it when I'd quickly checked my balance earlier in the week. The charge was dated the same day as the booking confirmation. My hands were actually shaking as I read through more of the emails between Emma and this Maria person. They were discussing the best way to approach me about the retreat, with Maria giving Emma advice on how to present it as a relationship investment and how to overcome any objections I might have. One email from Maria particularly stood out. She told Emma that men often resist spiritual growth opportunities and that Emma should focus on how the retreat would benefit our relationship rather than the personal transformation aspects. She suggested that Emma should present it as something we'd decided together, rather than something Emma wanted to do. There was also discussion about payment methods. Maria had asked Emma for my credit card details, saying they could process a deposit to and then discuss the full payment later. Emma had apparently provided my information without any hesitation. I sat there staring at the laptop screen, trying to process what I was seeing. Emma hadn't just fallen for a scam. She'd actively participated in stealing my credit card information and making unauthorized charges. She'd planned this whole elaborate presentation to manipulate me into agreeing to pay for something she'd already committed us to. The worst part was realizing how calculated it all was. The hurt expression when I'd objected, the emotional manipulation about not supporting her spiritual growth, the way she'd made it seem like the discounted price was some special deal. It had all been scripted. When Emma came back that evening, she acted completely normal, asking about my day and suggesting we order pizza. I didn't say anything about what I'd discovered. I needed time to figure out how to handle this, and I wanted to see if she'd come clean on her own. I spent the next couple of days watching Emma carefully, waiting to see if she'd mention anything about the unauthorized charge on my credit card or admit that she'd already booked the retreat. She didn't. She kept acting like we were still in the discussion phase about whether to attend this spiritual retreat together. On Saturday morning, she brought up the retreat again over breakfast. She told me she'd been thinking about what I'd said and that she understood my concerns about the cost. Then she suggested we could look at it as an investment in our future together, something that would pay dividends in terms of our relationship happiness. That's when I decided I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know what was going on. I told her I'd done some research on the retreat and found some concerning information. I pulled out the printed reviews I'd gathered and spread them across the kitchen table. Emma barely glanced at them before dismissing everything I'd found. She said that negative reviews were probably from people who weren't ready for spiritual transformation or who had gone into the experience with closed minds. She claimed that any legitimate spiritual practice would have skeptics and that we shouldn't let other people's negativity affect our decision. I pressed harder, pointing out specific details from the reviews about how people had lost money and received nothing in return. Emma got defensive and started accusing me of looking for excuses to avoid personal growth. She said I was being closed-minded and that my negative attitude was exactly the kind of thing the retreat would help us overcome. Then I brought up the unauthorized charge on my credit card. I told her I'd seen the booking confirmation and knew she'd already committed us to attending the retreat without my knowledge or consent. I expected her to be embarrassed or apologetic, but instead she got angry. She told me I had no right to go through her emails and that I was violating her privacy. When I pointed out that she'd violated my financial privacy by using my credit card without permission, she said that was completely different. According to her, couples should share financial resources, and since we were in a committed relationship, my money was essentially our money. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was trying to justify stealing from me by claiming that being in a relationship gave her the right to my credit card information. When I told her that wasn't how relationships worked, she accused me of being selfish and not understanding what commitment meant. The argument escalated quickly from there. Emma started crying and saying that I didn't trust her and that I was sabotaging our relationship. She claimed that she'd only made the booking because she was so excited about the opportunity for us to grow together spiritually, and that she'd planned to tell me about it eventually. I asked her when exactly she'd planned to mention that she'd already charged 500 euros to my credit card, and she said she was waiting for the right moment. She insisted that she knew I'd be supportive once I understood how important this was to her. The whole conversation felt surreal. Emma seemed genuinely convinced that what she'd done was reasonable and that I was the one being unreasonable by objecting to it. She kept coming back to the idea that my resistance to the retreat proved that we needed it even more. After that argument, things were tense between us for the rest of the weekend. Emma stayed at her own place Sunday night, which was unusual since she'd been spending most nights at my apartment. I was actually relieved to have some space to think about everything that had happened. On Monday evening, I went over to my friend Jake's place to get some perspective on the situation. Jake and I had been friends since college, and he was always good at giving me straight advice without sugarcoating anything. I brought along all the evidence I'd gathered, the printed reviews, screenshots of the emails, and my credit card statement showing the unauthorized charge. Jake looked through everything while I explained what had been happening. He was quiet for a long time, just reading and occasionally shaking his head. Finally, he looked up at me and asked if I was seriously considering staying with someone who'd stolen my credit card information to pay for a scam. When he put it that bluntly, it sounded even worse than it had in my head. I told him that Emma seemed to genuinely believe the retreat was legitimate and that maybe she'd just gotten caught up in the excitement. Jake pointed out that even if she believed in the retreat, That didn't excuse the fact that she'd used my credit card without permission and then lied to me about it. We spent a couple of hours going through all the red flags I'd been ignoring over the past few months. The way Emma always seemed to forget her wallet, how she'd gradually started treating my apartment like her own, the vague stories about her work and finances. Jake helped me see that the retreat scam was just the latest in a pattern of behavior. Jake suggested that I should confront Emma publicly, maybe at dinner with friends, so there would be witnesses to whatever she said. He thought that if she was really innocent, she'd be embarrassed and apologetic. But if she was trying to scam me, she might reveal her true intentions when put on the spot. I wasn't sure about the public confrontation idea, but Jake made a good point about having witnesses. He offered to organize a dinner at his favorite restaurant and invite a few of our mutual friends. That way, if Emma tried to twist the story later or claim I was lying about what happened, there would be other people who heard everything. We decided to make it seem like a casual group dinner, nothing special or suspicious. Jake would invite Emma and me along with two other couples we hung out with regularly. I would bring the printed evidence with me and wait for the right moment to bring up the retreat. The plan was to let Emma talk about the retreat naturally. Knowing her, she'd probably bring it up herself since she'd been so excited about it. Then I'd reveal what I'd discovered and see how she reacted. If she was genuinely innocent, she'd be shocked to learn it was a scam. If she was in on it, she'd probably get defensive and try to deflect blame. Jake helped me organize all the evidence into a clear presentation. We put the worst reviews on top, followed by the email confirmations and credit card statements. Everything was clearly dated and documented, so there wouldn't be any confusion about the timeline. The dinner was set for Thursday night at this Italian place Jake loved. Emma seemed excited about the group dinner, which made me feel a bit guilty about what I was planning. But then I reminded myself that she was the one who'd stolen my credit card information and lied to me for days. Everything started out normally. We ordered drinks and appetizers, and everyone was catching up on work and life stuff. Emma was in a great mood, laughing and joking with everyone. About halfway through dinner, she brought up the retreat, just like I'd expected she would. She started telling everyone about this amazing spiritual opportunity we'd discovered and how excited we were to experience it together. She described it like it was this exclusive, life-changing event that would transform our relationship. She even mentioned the discount we were getting, making it sound like we were lucky to have found such a great deal. I watched our friends' reactions as Emma talked. Most of them looked politely interested, but not particularly impressed. Jake kept glancing at me, waiting for me to make my move. I decided to let Emma finish her sales pitch before revealing what I discovered. Emma went on for several minutes about energy alignment and spiritual awakening, using all the same language from the brochure. She talked about how the retreat leaders were world-renowned experts in relationship healing and how couples came from all over Europe to attend their programs. When she finally paused to take a sip of wine, I pulled out the folder of evidence I'd brought with me. I told everyone that I'd done some research on this retreat and discovered some concerning information. Emma's expression immediately changed from excited to worried. I spread out the printed reviews on the table and started reading some of the worst ones out loud. The table got very quiet as I described how people had lost thousands of euros to this scam and received nothing in return. I showed them the screenshots of complaints from people who'd attended similar retreats run by the same organization. Emma tried to interrupt several times, saying that I was being negative and that every business gets some bad reviews. But our friends were reading the evidence for themselves, and their expressions were getting more serious as they realized what they were looking at. Then I pulled out the email confirmations and credit card statements. I explained how Emma had already booked us for the retreat using my credit card information, without my knowledge or permission. I showed them the dates, proving that she'd made the booking before ever mentioning the retreat to me. The silence at the table was deafening. Emma's face had gone completely red, and she was staring at her plate. Our friends were looking back and forth between the evidence and Emma, clearly shocked by what they were hearing. Emma finally looked up from her plate, and I could see she was furious. She started yelling at me right there in the restaurant, saying I had no right to embarrass her in front of our friends. She claimed I was making her look like a criminal when all she'd done was try to do something nice for our relationship. She tried to explain to everyone that the booking was meant to be a surprise and that she'd planned to tell me about it eventually. She said couples should be able to make decisions together without having to ask permission for everything. Several other diners were starting to stare at our table because her voice was getting louder and more emotional. Our friend Sarah asked Emma directly if she'd really used Ryan's credit card without telling him. Emma got defensive and said that people in committed relationships share financial responsibilities. She claimed that since we'd been together for 8 months and she spent most of her time at my apartment, it was reasonable for her to consider my resources as shared resources. Jake pointed out that sharing expenses was different from taking someone's credit card information without permission. He asked Emma how she'd gotten my credit card details in the first place. Emma's explanation was that she'd seen me enter my PIN at the grocery store and had memorized my card number from seeing it in my wallet. That admission made everyone at the table uncomfortable. Our friend Mike said that memorizing someone's credit card information without their knowledge sounded pretty sketchy. Emma got even more defensive, saying that everyone was ganging up on her and that no one understood how relationships were supposed to work. She tried to change the subject back to the retreat, insisting that even if there were some negative reviews, that didn't mean the whole thing was a scam. She said that spiritual practices were often misunderstood by people who weren't ready for transformation. But our friends had read the evidence, and they weren't buying her explanations. Sarah asked Emma if she'd actually looked into the retreat organizers or just accepted everything they told her at face value. Emma admitted that she hadn't done any independent research, but said that wasn't necessary because she could feel that it was legitimate. She claimed to have good intuition about these things. That's when Jake started laughing. Not mean laughter, but the kind of laugh you make when something is so ridiculous you can't help yourself. He said that trusting your intuition was fine for choosing what to wear or what to eat for lunch, but probably not the best approach when spending thousands of euros on something. The other couple started making jokes about Emma's and how maybe she should use it to predict lottery numbers instead of falling for scams. Emma realized that everyone was basically mocking her at this point, and she got even angrier. She stood up from the table and announced that she was leaving because no one respected her or understood what she was trying to do. She said we were all too negative and closed-minded to appreciate real spiritual growth. Then she stormed out of the restaurant, leaving her purse and jacket behind. I grabbed Emma's stuff and followed her outside, leaving our friends to deal with the awkward aftermath. I found her standing on the sidewalk, crying and looking completely lost. For a moment, I actually felt sorry for her, despite everything that had happened. I handed her the purse and jacket, and she wiped her eyes before putting the jacket on. She looked at me and said that she couldn't believe I'd humiliated her like that in front of all our friends. She claimed that I'd made her look like a fool and that she'd never be able to face any of them again. I told her that I hadn't made her look like anything. Her own actions had created this situation. I pointed out that she was the one who'd stolen my credit card information and lied to me about booking the retreat. I said that if she was embarrassed, it was because she'd done embarrassing things. Emma tried one last time to convince me that the retreat was legitimate and that we should go through with it. She said that all the negative reviews were probably from competitors trying to damage the retreat's reputation. She claimed that the universe had brought this opportunity to us and that we'd be making a huge mistake by not taking advantage of it. When I told her I'd already contacted my credit card company to dispute the charge and report the fraud, she completely lost it. She started screaming at me on the sidewalk, saying that I was ruining everything and that I obviously didn't care about our relationship or her happiness. She demanded that I choose between her and she said that if I really loved her, I'd trust her judgment about the retreat and support her decision to book it. She gave me an ultimatum. Either we go to the retreat together or our relationship was over. I looked at this person I'd been dating for 8 months, standing there on the sidewalk demanding that I pay 2,000 euros for a scam retreat or lose her forever. I realized that this wasn't really a choice at all. Someone who would steal from me, lie to me, and then try to manipulate me into accepting it wasn't someone I wanted to be with. I told Emma that I'd made my choice. I said that I wouldn't be going to any retreat and that I thought our relationship had run its course. I wished her luck with her spiritual journey, but said it would have to be a journey she took without me. Emma stared at me for a long moment, like she couldn't believe I was actually choosing to end things. Then she called me selfish and said that I'd regret this decision for the rest of my life. She claimed that I was throwing away the best thing that had ever happened to me because I was too scared of personal growth. I walked back into the restaurant to rejoin our friends, leaving Emma standing on the sidewalk. When I got back to the table, everyone was quiet, clearly having heard the shouting from outside. Jake asked if I was okay, and I told him I would be. The next few days were weird. Emma kept calling and texting, alternating between apologies and accusations. Sometimes she'd say she was sorry for using my credit card without permission and that we could work things out. Other times she'd blame me for being unsupportive and claim that I'd never really cared about her. I didn't respond to most of her messages, but I did text her once to let her know that she needed to come get her stuff from my apartment. She had quite a bit of things there since she'd been basically living with me for the past few months. I told her she could come by when I wasn't home if that would be easier. She showed up the following Saturday while I was out running errands. When I got back, most of her stuff was gone, but she'd left a long handwritten letter on my kitchen table. The letter was a mix of apologies, accusations, and spiritual advice about how I needed to open my heart to new experiences. She claimed that she still believed the retreat was legitimate and that she was planning to find a way to attend on her own. She said that the experience would prove to me that I'd been wrong about everything, and that maybe then I'd realize what I'd given up. The letter also included some pretty harsh criticisms of my character. She said I was too logical and analytical, and that I let my fears prevent me from experiencing real growth. She claimed that my skepticism was actually a form of spiritual weakness, and that I'd never find true happiness until I learned to trust in something bigger than myself. Reading that letter, I realized how different we really were as people. Emma saw my careful, analytical approach to life as a character flaw, while I saw her willingness to believe anything that sounded appealing as dangerous naivety. We'd been fundamentally incompatible from the start. I never heard from Emma again after that letter. I did get confirmation from my credit card company that they'd successfully disputed the €500 charge and removed it from my account. They also issued me a new card with different numbers, just to be safe. A few weeks later, Jake told me he'd heard through mutual friends that Emma had tried to organize her own group to attend the retreat, but hadn't been able to find anyone willing to pay the full price. Apparently, word had gotten around about what happened at dinner, and people were avoiding anything she recommended. I felt a little bad about that, since it probably hurt her reputation in our social circle. But I also knew that people had a right to know what kind of person they were dealing with. Epilogue. It's been about 6 months since all this happened, and I'm honestly relieved that Emma and I broke up. I've got my own place back to myself, my finances are secure, and I don't have to worry about someone using my personal information without permission. I did some reflecting on the whole experience and realized that I'd ignored a lot of warning signs because I wanted the relationship to work. Emma's casual attitude toward money, the way she'd gradually moved into my space without really discussing it, and her tendency to make decisions for both of us without consulting me first, all of that should have told me we weren't compatible. I'm dating someone new now, and the difference is night and day. Sarah is financially independent, respects boundaries, and would never dream of using my credit card without asking. We actually talk about decisions that affect both of us instead of one person just announcing what we're going to do. Sometimes I wonder if Emma ever went to that retreat or if she eventually realized it was a scam. Part of me hopes she figured it out before losing any more money, but honestly, it's not my problem anymore.